Ladies, gentlemen, all those outside and in between, welcome to another episode of RenFare, a podcast dedicated to psychoanalyzing and critiquing media. I am your host, Connor Renfro, one half of From the Margins. Listen until the end for more ways to hear me and support the project. Remember how Boyd died last season after getting no characterization? Davis came under fire on Tumblr by fans who accused him of racism. Teen Wolf had 5 black characters in the first 3 seasons. Dr. Alan Deaton, Scott's boss and druid, who was relegated to a support role. Marin Morell, Deaton's sister, also a druid, who was mostly used for exposition. Vernon Boyd, rest in peace, the strong and silent type who ended up dead. Kali, whose actress Felicia Terrell is actually mixed race, she's dead. And then Brayden, who was in one episode. She's that mysterious girl who saved Isaac from the Alpha Pack. They didn't even give her a name the first time she appeared. She'll be back later, though. Deaton and Morell play into this trope of black and indigenous people appearing in stories to use magic and support their white heroes. Druids are nature wizards, and attributing magical qualities to black characters separates them from the same plane of humanity as the ordinary white folks. It makes them mystical, mysterious, other, not like us. Even in a series about werewolves, having your most prominent black character being a wise wizard who guides his mostly white flock can be a little problematic. Davis made a Tumblr post addressing the race issues of the show,
and then deleted his blog when the rabid fans chased him off the platform.
Apparently, Cinqua Walls, the actor who played Boyd, had scheduling conflicts and couldn't commit to the series, so that's why his character barely appeared, didn't get developed, and then got killed off. In that same post, Davis also issued the following statement regarding casting. When we send out breakdowns for cast, it always says, quote, all ethnicities, end quote. I'm quite proud of the fact that our lead actor is Latino, but I have always said I will not make Teen Wolf an issues show. So reading that post in 2013 was the first time I even knew Tyler Posey was half Mexican. It makes sense because the actress who plays Melissa, his mom, Melissa Ponzio, is Mexican. Scott's heritage was never addressed in the show so far. So it almost doesn't matter that the character is of Mexican descent. It does nothing to engage with that heritage. And this can be tricky because does a character have to engage with their race in order to be of that race? So on one hand, we want diversity on the screen, and having people of color brought on to only address topics of race makes that character a racialized subject. Racialization or ethnicization is the process of ascribing ethnic or racial identities to a relationship, social practice, or group that did not identify itself as such. Scott being half Mexican doesn't have to be a major part of his identity if the character doesn't deal with it. He could just be Mexican.
Beacon Hills is post-race anyway. Why would he ever have to confront it?
On the other hand, what's the point of applauding yourself for having a Latino star when you're trying to be post-racial anyway?
Which is hardly a compelling defense when you open the roles to
all ethnicities,
and your cast is still overwhelmingly white.
Your setting might not have racism, but Hollywood still does.
Also, it's pretty easy to have a town with no racism when everyone is white. I don't see color. Oh, is that because the one black guy died?
Okay, I have to stop. This is just reductive now.
Another disclaimer, I'm not saying Jeff Davis or Teen Wolf is racist. I'm just doing cheeky stand-up with transgressive themes meant to poke fun at an existing, cemented cultural product. It does nothing for the discourse to attribute blame to individuals without a broader systemic analysis.
Have you guessed today's topic?
We're reading Season 3B through the lens of critical race theory. CRT as a movement came out of the civil rights movement. Scholars started by examining the legacies of slavery in the United States and carried it into broader critiques of race. The school has expanded to view other race groups and how the concept of race shapes experience. As far as literary criticism, we're concerned with depictions of race and how they are shaped, and in turn shape, the culture which produces these works. What can we learn about our story by examining the racial politics of our setting and how it influences our characters? The supernatural is treated as a different race from humans. Shapeshifters are treated as subhuman, controlled, hunted, feared, etc. For the most part, the two groups try to remain separate. Hunters police the supernatural. As far as actual race politics in the United States, we are supposed to believe that, at least in Beacon Hills, no one cares about skin color or ethnic groups.
Let's finally get into some plot summary.
As a result of their temporary deaths, Scott, Styles, and Allison are now experiencing vivid hallucinations. Allison is haunted by visions of Kate, her dead aunt. Her shadow is emerging to remind her of all of her mistakes. That's her Jungian shadow. Allison's hunter family has historically oppressed the supernatural. Recently she's acted out of anger and done some horrendous things.
Like shooting Boyd 100 times.
Now, she and her father have put down their weapons and just want to be normal. An attempt to just forget their historic involvement in oppression. Styles is having terrible nightmares and is unable to read. We'll talk about him later. Scott's shadow, his actual shadow, not the Jungian shadow, it now looks like a giant monster, like season 1 Peter. He's unsure of his new responsibilities. Part of him might still be afraid of the beast within. Scott is also having trouble controlling his shift. Allison and Isaac are seeing each other on the DL.
That's down low for you boomers.
Scott is very upset about this. Isaac asks Scott,
"Do you want to hit me?"
Now, is that because Isaac was abused by his father and he's still learning to separate physical abuse from love?
No, it's just played for laughs.
Scott is real torn up by the idea that Allison might be moving on. At one point, he gets so upset that he starts to shift. He can't control it. He's turning into a wolf in front of his mom. So she sits him down and she gives him the talk. Yeah, you were in love and it ended and it feels like the end of the world, but you're going to survive and feel that all over again with someone new. Until then, be your own anchor. No more using your love interest as the basis for your health and humanity.
It's kind of a bold move for an MTV show to have the core couple break up and show that complicated process of moving on while trying to remain friends and guardians of the mortal plane. It's actually one of the last parts of actually being a teenager that the show bothers to examine. The messiness of moving past a failed relationship even though you both still love each other.
I mean, we all know they're going to get back together anyway. They're Scott and Allison, the wolf and the hunter, Beauty and the Beast. The show is just making us hold out because the romantic tension is lost if the endgame couple is just happily together from the beginning.
Ooh, speaking of romantic tension, Scott befriends a new student named Kira Yukimura, played by Arden Cho. Kira's father is the new history teacher at Beacon Hills High School. So Kira overhears our group talking about their psychological problems, and she identifies their condition as a spiritual state known as Bardo. In some schools of Buddhism, Kira mentions Tibetan. Bardo is the stage of existence between death and reincarnation. So from the Wikipedia article, first you have the clearest experiences of reality of which you are spiritually capable. I think this means you see everything clearly, you understand everything, or at least as much as you're able, depending on your spirit. This is a karmic thing, so if you lived a good life and have a good spirit, you will be granted more understanding. Then you have horrifying hallucinations based on the mistakes you made in your previous life, like what's happening to Allison. This is the part where you're supposed to own up to your failures. If you overpower these hallucinations, you achieve karmic liberation. If you succumb to them, you might be reincarnated worse than before.
Think of the film Jacob's Ladder or the Silent Hill games.
According to Kira, the final stage is death.
I'm guessing she read a different Wikipedia article than I did.
Or maybe she's not technically wrong since, you're supposed to be reincarnated. The whole point of Bardo is that you've already died and your soul is coming to terms with it before moving on to the next life. I guess technically Scott, Styles, and Allison did die. They, stopped their heartbeats. But then they got, resuscitated. They were revived into their, current lives. So they're not, dead.
So I don't know how Kira overhears these strangers discussing hallucinations and is just like,
oh yeah, that sounds like Bardo to me. It's not that you all have PTSD, you're actually all dead.
Stiles' dad, Sheriff Stilinski, reopens a missing persons case now that he knows about the supernatural. However many years ago, a car ran off the road with a mother and 2 daughters inside, but only 2 bodies were recovered, and the inside of the car was all scratched up by claws. So now Sheriff Stilinski thinks, okay, maybe a shapeshifter was involved. Scott and Stiles search the crime scene for clues, and they end up finding a coyote whose eyes glow blue.
Remember, glowing blue eyes means you're a werewolf who killed an innocent person.
So Scott realizes that this coyote is actually one of the presumed victims, a girl named Malia Tate. Scott and his friends attempt to track down the were-coyote before her father kills her, her human father. Mr. Tate thinks it's a regular coyote that killed his family and he wants revenge. Symbolically, the shifter changeling child is an interloper that destroyed his family. Scott tracks down Malia and uses his alpha powers to transform her back into a human. He does like the glowing red eyes thing and a roar, and she submits to him and turns back into a human. Then we see Derek and Peter being tortured by electricity.
Where's Cora?
Oh, they sent her to a French convent until she comes of age to marry Prince Francis II.
So Derek and Peter's captors want information about a character called the Desert Wolf.
More about her much, much later.
Peter and Derek then end up getting freed from their captors by Brayden, that mysterious girl. This is her only appearance in 3B, so don't think she's important yet. Then, at the stump of the Nematon, somebody releases a swarm of fireflies that transform into these shadowy figures. Scott has dinner with the Yukimuras. So Kira's dad is actually Korean, but he took his wife's surname because it has a great history.
I think there's a point to be made here, marrying into a family simply to uphold that name.
So Kira is actually half Korean. I think this is Davis's way of preempting any Tumblr discourse around a Korean actress being cast to play a Japanese character.
Ooh, he really wasn't kidding about open casting calls.
This conversation prompts Scott to call his mom and ask her why she kept his father's surname instead of changing it back to Delgado after the divorce.
Is this a measure to unwhitewash Scott?
So there's this dude, William Barrow. He was an electrical engineer who then turned into a mass murderer. He abducts Kira and takes her to a power plant and tries to execute her with electricity. But when the electricity touches her body, she's able to turn it back onto him and kills him instantly. But it also creates a power failure for the entire town. And during the blackout, those shadowy, mysterious figures from the Nematon appear and they attack Isaac. So Kira reveals to Scott that her body has this glowing aura whenever you take a flash photography picture of her. Then Danny and Ethan throw a Halloween party in Derek's loft because Derek's like in Mexico getting tortured, so nobody's at home. And it's a blacklight party, so everybody's there, and Scott looks at Kira and he realizes that her aura is just a giant muscular fox. Allison is with Isaac and she looks behind his ear and sees what looks like the reverse number 5. At this party, Ethan and Lydia get attacked by the hooded figures, and they also get those backwards 5s stamped behind their ears. And then Stiles runs into Caitlin.
Who's Caitlin?
Oh, she's the girlfriend of that one lesbian girl who got killed in the last season.
Oh, but Caitlin actually likes girls and boys. They never say the word bisexual, but yeah, she's bisexual.
Stiles is like, don't you like girls? And she's like, yeah, I like girls. Do you like girls? And he's like, yeah. And then she's like, oh, but I also like boys. Do you also like boys? And then Stiles gets like this confused, pondering look on his face. And then he realizes something plot relevant and leaves her behind. So we don't actually get any closure on that. I don't even know why they included that.
Queer baiting. Stiles discovers that his handwriting matches a coded message that was left behind on a chalkboard, which was instructing William Barrow to kill Kira.
So now Stiles is afraid that, oh, I'm losing time, and when I'm in my fugue state, I'm telling people to kill other people.
Wow, like sleepwalking and fugue states are like such a thing in this series. Go figure.
So Allison tells her dad about the mysterious figures that show up, and he's like, oh yeah, this reminds me of that one time I was Japan meeting the Yakuza, and those same guys showed up. They're called Oni. So in Japanese folklore, Oni are yokai, or demons, They're sometimes described as ogres or trolls. In Teen Wolf, they just look like samurai, but they're wearing the Hanya masks, those like theater masks with like the grumpy faces. Chris Argent, Allison, and Isaac make this plan to infiltrate the lair of the only other survivor of that attack, a man named Katashi, also known as Silverfinger, to get answers.
I don't know why this Katashi guy just happened to be in Beacon Hills. Maybe he's in like San Francisco and they just drive up to meet him or something. But yeah, they like have this fun little misadventure where they have to like work the way around the customs of the Yakuza until finally they can like get an audience with him.
And Katashi warns Argent about this creature called the Nogitsune. Let's go back to Japanese folklore. So you've probably heard of a kitsune. These are another form of yokai. They're fox spirits. As they grow older, wiser, and more powerful, they get more tails. They can have as many as 9. So kitsune can be good. Those are called zenko, or good foxes. Kitsune can also be bad. Those are called yako, or field foxes. Zenko kitsune are benevolent celestial spirits, and sometimes they're the messengers of Inari, the great fox spirit. But yako are mischievous, and sometimes they're called Nogitsune, which is the term the show uses. Kitsune are also shapeshifters. This is in real folklore, not in the show. So in the folklore, kitsune are foxes who disguise themselves as humans. So they're fox first, human second. Not to be confused with the werewolf, who is human first and wolf second. I won't explain anything more to avoid spoilers, but I think you can see where this is going. Katashi tells Argent, if you're dealing with a real Nogitsune, you should let the Oni kill it.
That's what the Oni were doing, by the way, when they were marking 5s on people's ears. They were actually checking every shapeshifter to see if it was a Nogitsune. And if they weren't, they'd stamp you with the backwards 5, which is the kanji for self, if I'm remembering correctly, saying they are themselves, not possessed.
So practically the entire rest of the cast is in Scott's house getting ready for an Oni attack. And the Oni managed to breach the mountain ash circle and enter the house. And they do the little purity test on Scott and Kira, and both of them pass.
So who's the Nogitsune?
Let's go back to Styles. Sweet, sweet Styles.
So earlier in that episode, he had begun to worry about his sanity, and he goes to the hospital to get help from Melissa, Scott's mom. So she interviews him, and she realizes that his symptoms are identical to those of his mother Claudia, who died of frontotemporal dementia. But then she also sees that Styles hasn't slept in like 4 days. So she's like, okay, maybe you're just sleep deprived. And she gives him a sedative and he falls asleep.
And as he's falling asleep, he calls her mom. Oh my god.
Well, after the Oni attack, Styles wakes up from his little nap and he walks down the hall and the Oni show up. But before they can do a test on him, he just like cuts out one of their throats and it turns into a firefly. And then in the next episode, Styles, still pretending to be a human, gets an MRI scan to test for frontotemporal dementia, and the power goes out because the night before, he sabotaged the power supply for the hospital. And when everything goes dark, the remaining Oni come out, being led by Kira's mother.
She's the one controlling the Oni to kill the Nogitsune. Oh my god.
Well, he manages to escape that whole ordeal.
And then off-screen, Katashi gets murdered, and Derek and Chris are framed for the murder, and that whole subplot goes nowhere, so I won't indulge it any deeper. You just need to know that Katashi is dead.
And then another thing that isn't really that important, but it's a good example of how evil the Nogitsune is. There's an episode where Styles disappears and then shows up in the basement of the school, and it turns out that under the Nogitsune's possession, he laid a bunch of traps on the cross-country field that the team have to then run through and save all the other runners from.
And wow, foxes are supposed to be mischievous, but it really seems like this Nogitsune is just pure evil. Allison and Lydia go to get help from Peter. In exchange, Peter asks for Lydia's help in finding a memory that his sister took away from him.
So, real quick lore thing. Apparently, alpha werewolves can access the minds of people by sticking their claws in their necks. And I think only alphas can do this, but the show might prove me wrong later. But Talia Hale, as Peter's alpha at the time, stole a memory from him, and he thinks Lydia, since she's a banshee, can get it back for him.
So Lydia, tunes in to the supernatural frequency and she hears some whispers and she realizes that Peter is Malia's actual biological father.
And remember, Malia's the were-coyote girl from at the beginning of this season.
So Peter is her actual father. Then there's another scene where Stiles, Scott, and Kira are at Deaton's veterinary office and the Oni attack them again and they manage to escape because...
Well, Scott and Kira want to keep Stiles safe. They don't want him to die because the Oni, they're just going to kill the host no matter what. They don't care about saving it. They just want to kill the Nagitsune.
So they manage to save Stiles, but then Stiles turns around and knocks Kira unconscious and stabs Scott because he's just a mean little man. But luckily, Deaton shows up and he uses this mystical poison he found to subdue the Nagitsune. I think it's like a rare blend of yellow wolfsbane.
They explain it in the show, but I don't care enough to tell you about it.
So after that whole episode, the Nagitsune is dormant, and while Stiles is in control, he's like, yo, we've got to contain this thing. So he checks himself into a mental hospital. Specifically, this one is called Icon House. This is the same one that Barrow, the bomber guy, had been committed to. Icon is also the German word for echoes. That'll be important later. Inside of Icon House, Stiles encounters Malia Tate. Oh, she did come back. And she is not happy about being turned back into a human. As soon as she sees Stiles, she just like punches him out. It is on sight with her. Oh, but later he walks in on her taking a shower and he's like, oh my God, I'm so sorry. And she's like, I don't care. I'm a coyote. I'm used to being naked. She was stuck in a coyote's body for like 8 years, 10 years. I don't remember the math. So she's really more connected to the animal part of herself than the human one. Being human makes her face the shame for causing her mom and sister's deaths. Also, she was a full-on coyote for those 10 years. Ever since Scott changed her back, she hasn't been able to get back to that form. She can only do the half shift, the claws, jaws, and shiny eyes that the other werewolves do. Also... Oh, why is she a coyote and not a wolf? Like, why is she specifically a coyote? Whatever. So Morel tells Stiles that he must stay awake. Why is Morel there? Probably she wants to put her psych degree to better use than being a school counselor. It doesn't matter. She just like disappears from the show forever after that one cameo. There's another patient at Icon House named Meredith, and she like reports to somebody into like this disconnected phone server. She'll become important next season. I just thought I'd introduce her now, so plant that little nugget in your brain. So Stiles gets Malia's help to access the basement. I don't remember why he wants to go down there, but at this point he pretty much knows the truth about the Nagitsune is contained in the Icon basement. And sure enough, they get down there and they see the backwards 5 kanji that means self. But they find the wall and they don't know what to do next, so they have sex.
Is it time for the conspiracy theory?
I think it's time for the conspiracy theory.
So season 2, Erica was a sexy, snarky werewolf girl in Derek's pack who turned out to have a crush on Stiles, and the two of them share a little banter. Season 3A, Erica's actress leaves the show, so they bring in Cora. Cora is a beautiful, grumpy werewolf girl and Derek's younger sister. Stiles has to give her mouth to mouth, and he says that thing about, like, the next time I kiss you, you'd better be awake. So Stiles at least anticipates kissing Cora again. But also, that's the kind of thing you would say to someone you have an established rapport with, not some rando who showed up and spent the season skulking in the background. Then Cora leaves, and they bring in another hot, angry werewolf girl. Sorry, were-coyote. And this time, she's Derek's cousin, because she's the daughter of Peter. The two of them have like 3 scenes together before they're all, alright, let's do this.
So I have this theory that Stiles and Erica were always meant to be a thing, at least for a little bit. The problem with Lydia was that Stiles idolized her too much and couldn't see her as a person, but then he would date another girl, drink some Respect Women juice, and then be emotionally prepared to have a healthy relationship with Lydia. And Erica was supposed to be that intermediary girl, but because actresses kept leaving the show, the archetype and the narrative role they were meant to play kept getting passed on to other women until the last minute when Stiles absolutely had to lose his virginity, and it's to a girl he just met.
And don't even get me started on the fact that this was Styles' first time. He had been griping for the previous 30 episodes about how everyone was getting it but him, and in the last season, his virginity even put his life at risk.
I already established how it might be part of Teen Wolf's ethos to disempower that whole notion of virginity, which is admirable.
But Styles as a character puts a lot of stock in it, and it just doesn't feel congruent for him to just give it up without making a big deal out of it.
Also, the setting. They're in the basement of a mental institution. Styles is being possessed by a demon. He's been responsible for several deaths at this point. I just don't see how he could be in the mood. So they finish up. Malia realizes that the kanji wall is hollow and the Nagitsune is inside that hollow. So they break it out and he turns the tides on them, and the Nagitsune gives Styles an ultimatum. Allow it in or watch Malia die.
This girl you just met and lost her virginity to, and I don't know, Styles wants to save her life, so he's like, fine, possess me.
And while this episode is going on, Chris Argent and Dr. Deaton are working together to find a hidden scroll inside of Katashi's finger to save Styles.
That's the reason Katashi was named Silverfingers, because he lost his finger and had a silver one put on instead.
And inside of it is this ancient scroll that is meant to give the secret to destroying the Nagitsune. Deaton reads the scroll and learns that the Nagitsune's host body needs to change its form in order to remove it. What does that mean? Hold on to that tidbit for the end. At this point, Kira learns that her mother is actually a kitsune who is close to 900 years old. She has 9 tails, the maximum number of tails for a kitsune, symbolized by 9 knives. The mom can create Oni by breaking the knives, trading her tails for their magic. Backstory time. During the Second World War, the mom was in a Japanese internment camp. So Kira's dad is a World War II historian focusing on Japanese internment camps, and he claimed there never was one in Beacon Hills, but it turns out there was one called Oak Creek, and because of a great tragedy, the government shut it down and erased all records of it.
Wow. So Jeff Davis wants to tackle California's recent history of Japanese internment camps. Let's see how this plays out.
So the mom's name is Noshiko, and young Noshiko fell in love with a medic named Reese.
Does anyone else think that an interned Japanese woman starting an affair with a white U.S. soldier is a little yikes?
In these flashback segments, Noshiko is played by Arden Cho, which means that the character looked like her own teenage daughter in 1943, but now looks like Tamlin Tomita in the present. That's the actress for adult Noshiko. Considering this aired in 2014, this means Noshiko aged 30 years over the past 70 years, despite being a teenager for 800 years. But I guess World War II took a toll on everyone. A riot breaks out in the internment camp, and Reese gets burned, and he dies from those burns. The other U.S. soldiers slaughter all of the interned people and then bury them in a mass grave. Now, because she's a kitsune, Noshiko survives the bullets, but she's still healing from them when she's being buried, and she's unable to really move. But she calls upon a Nagitsune to possess her so that she can have revenge. But the Nagitsune possesses her lover's body instead. So the Nagitsune is a product of Noshiko's rage. He is the avenger for the crimes against the Japanese people. It's a very specific anger created by racial injustice and marginalization. But he entered Reese's body, a white man. Noshiko turned a white man into a monster. Well, technically, he was already a monster. I mean, he was portrayed as one of the good ones. He was a nice soldier who was compassionate toward the people whose oppression he directly contributed to. In Season 1, Peter went on a rampage as vengeance for the genocidal crimes of the hunters against the werewolves, and I read that as a race allegory. Here, it's not even allegory. Noshiko's hatred manifested as an evil spirit that possessed her dead lover's body. But even after he killed the other soldiers, he still went around committing atrocities. So Noshiko heals up, and then she rises to the occasion and defeats the Nogitsune, but her katana is destroyed in the process. We can view the katana here as a cultural artifact. It's a Japanese sword. When Noshiko battles the Nogitsune, she is also battling her resentment for how her people were racially oppressed and murdered. It's racialized baggage. Non-Japanese people did not face this specific atrocity, and the Nogitsune is the anger caused by this specific atrocity. When Noshiko kills her manifest anger, the katana fractures. This cultural artifact, this symbol of her heritage, fractures. I can't say what Noshiko's feelings around her heritage and culture are. She seems very proud to be Japanese. Her husband was willing to take her name to keep the Yukimura line going. But insofar as we're dealing with Nogitsune and racial baggage, she sees it as something that must be destroyed and contained. She sealed the demon in the roots of the Nematon. So Scott and his friends may have been responsible for the reawakening of the Nogitsune. Uh-oh. Kira, a thunder kitsune.
So there's more than one type of kitsune. Kira is specifically a thunder one. That's her electricity thing.
She's able to fix the katana that slew the Nogitsune in the past. Kira is able to reconstitute the cultural artifact after learning her mother's story. By connecting with her mother's, and by extension her own background, Kira is able to reconstitute that connection to her heritage. But she's still mad at her mom for lying to her for like her entire life and actually being like 900. So she stays the night at Scott's house and they kiss. Later on, Peter teaches Scott how to enter people's minds with his alpha claws. So Scott is able to connect his psyche with Styles and Lydia's in order to free Styles from the possession. Scott and Lydia go inside of Styles' head and they find Styles and the Nogitsune playing Go, which is an ancient Chinese game, kind of like checkers mixed with tic-tac-toe, where you try to surround more territory on the board with your colored stones.
So maybe it's more like that one mobile game where you try to make the screen your color without letting anybody else get in the way of like the line you're drawing.
They manage to free Styles from the Nogitsune's control. I think Scott does an alpha roar at him and Styles wakes up and throws the Go board on the floor. And in the real world, Styles starts vomiting up a ton of bandages, like the one that Reese was wrapped in after his burn injuries. And the real Styles emerges out of those bandages, and the evil duplicate Styles runs off with Lydia.
Oh no.
Noshiko tries to teach Kira how to play Go, and Kira's father realizes that the Nogitsune and Noshiko play the game the same way. So Noshiko and the Nogitsune are linked through this heritage artifact. Lydia is taken to the Oak Creek internment camp because it started there, so it's gotta end there.
We paid for this Japanese internment camp set, and we are going to get as much use out of it as we can this season.
So the entire group shows up, and they find out that Noshiko and the Oni are already there planning to kill the Nogitsune.
And I don't know why they don't just let her, because they've already gotten the real Styles out. So it doesn't matter. Or maybe I'm forgetting something from the plot.
It doesn't matter anyway, because the Nogitsune possesses the Oni and turns them against the group. So Scott and Styles break off to find Lydia while the others are fighting. Allison manages to kill one of the Oni, but then she gets stabbed by another one. And Scott runs out to hold her in his arms, and she professes her love to him, and then she dies.
Well, so much for them being endgame.
Oh, dang. Scott is really going to have a lot of baggage around this relationship now. Or maybe he's actually lucky because now Allison can't move on. He's always going to be the love of her life now. So now that the Nogitsune controls the Oni, he makes them take over the hospital, sheriff station, high school, and Deaton's animal clinic. Basically every film set they have. He's taking territory in Beacon Hills just like Go. He's treating real life like a game of Go. Isaac and Mr. Argent realize that Silver can destroy Oni. Allison was able to kill that one Oni because she shot it with like a real silver arrow. So Silver is her heritage artifact. She's a hunter, and her last name is Argent. Okay. So her cultural artifact is able to kill Noshiko's cultural artifact. That line of thinking has very unfortunate implications.
Also, the Oni are actually Noshiko's tails, so each one that they kill is literally hurting Noshiko. Yikes, this might be a little more fraught than the writers intended. Let's back out of that train of thought.
The Nogitsune manages to transport Scott, Kira, Styles, and Lydia into like this parallel dimension, and Kira tells them that they're in Bardo. I really think Kira needs to reread the Wikipedia article on Bardo. They realize the Oni attacks are just an illusion, so they just walk through and Scott bites the Nogitsune. Now that Scott is an alpha, his bite can turn people into werewolves.
Remember how the Nogitsune can only be defeated by changing its form?
Well, it can't both be a fox and a wolf. So the duplicate of Styles that the Nogitsune was using as a body disintegrates and turns into a fly. Isaac then traps that fly in a box made of Nematon wood. And, that's the end. For the most part, they killed the bad guy. No more plot summary. Let's just unpack what we have here. So, kitsune are from Japanese folklore. They are fox spirits. Kira, as the daughter of a Japanese kitsune, is one herself. From the second Kira was introduced, she was racialized. The whole point of her character was to be Japanese, or of Japanese descent, not even touching on how her and her father's Korean identities were completely ignored to focus on the mom. We don't know any other character's ethnic background. I mean, I guess we did learn Scott is half Mexican after encountering Kira made him racially conscious, but all the other people?
Okay, so Allison's family is French, and in the past they fought Le Bête du Gévaudan, but even that doesn't get nearly the amount of attention Kira's Japanese heritage does.
White is a default. Everything else is aberrant. It has to be explained. It has to be justified. Kira's character was necessary for our other characters to get a view into Japanese culture and understand the distinctly Japanese element to this plotline.
Like internment camps and the Yakuza.
The Kitsune and Nogitsune are not just Japanese creatures. They symbolize deeper connections to Japanese identity. In one light, Kira is actually a really cool character. As a member of the Japanese diaspora growing up in California, the kitsune inside her is a source of power and wonder, strength and sturdiness. But it's also racialized because it makes her other. All the Western shapeshifters are wolves and coyotes, and Kira is the only fox. Before Kira, Davis was drawing inspiration from a lot of Celtic and Western European folklore. Werewolves, druids, Nematon, etc. But he never took the time to mention Celtic people or deeply explore their culture. In fact, the two most prominent druids of the series are both black. Druidism has been completely divorced of its ethnic origin.
Well, it's for the best that Davis respected Japanese culture enough to not drop in some white kitsune. No one wants that.
And there's also a difference between lycanthropy being something that can be passed around, whereas one has to be born a kitsune.
Oh, but then that also points out the transience of white culture as something that can be passed around and taken as granted, whereas Japanese culture is somehow different, somehow strictly only them. It belongs to this group only.
Oh my god. I am not articulate enough to muse on these sensitive subjects on a public platform. Just stick to the script, Connor. So whether this was Davis's intention, he did create a dichotomy of Western wolves and Eastern foxes. How does Scott defeat the Nogitsune? The manifestation of Noshiko's anger over racial oppression? he turns it into a werewolf, or he turns the host body into a werewolf. The host can't be a wolf and a fox. It can't be west and east. Wow, season 3 was rough. Teen Wolf hates women and people of color?
Just kidding.
I truly believe the creative team doesn't intend the things that come out in my analysis. I think a lot of it is unconscious or no, just unfortunate coincidence. It's the thing I said earlier about like, your setting might not be racist, but Hollywood is. We're only creating in the structures of the culture we're in. So it's very easy for me in 2020 to critique this season of television written in 2014 when we're not even reading deeply. We're just trying to make good television. Anyway, next time we'll be looking at season 4, and I promise that one's going to be just a lot more fun and not like politically correct or whatever. Thank you for listening to RenFare. I hope you'll join me next time. RenFare is available to listen wherever you find your podcasts. If you like this content and want to hear more, feel free to follow me on Spotify, Anchor.fm, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Radio Free Public, Bullhorn, and several others. RenFare is also uploaded to the From the Margins YouTube channel that I share with my content partner Violet Knight. You can join us there to hear us discuss current events and our own interests. If you feel so inclined, you can join the discussion by becoming a member of our Patreon to support the growing channel. From the Margins with Violet and Connor is also available to stream on the audio platforms I listed above. Please check us out there as well. Until next time.